Well, hi everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of TGCA's Everyday Conversations. I'm Marcos Ballog, the CEO of the Gospel Coalition Australia. I'm joined by special guest Peter Jensen, the former Anglican Archbishop of Sydney, and his brother Philip, the former Dean of Sydney. Now, in a moment, I'm going to disappear off this call and reappear at the very end, which means we'll have both Peter and Philip in conversation together about life and faith during COVID-19. Now, because this is such a rare event, we'll be going a little bit longer than normal. So we'll go for 30 minutes or so. So Peter, Philip, I'll hand it over to you now and I'll see you both at the end.
Okay, greetings to everyone. Now, Philip, our mother used to call us Cain and Abel, but did you ever work out which was Cain and which was Abel?
No, I could never work that. It depended on what was happening at the time, I suspect.
Let's see. Yes, there we are.
Her other Bible verse always was from, I am neither a prophet nor the son of a prophet. As soon as I asked what was going to happen, I was neither a prophet nor a son of a prophet.
So she quoted the Bible at you?
Yes, 2 verses. Cain and Abel. Not a prophet.
What a woman.
She was indeed.
She was indeed. Yeah.
Our family's been affected, Bo, by pandemics before today, haven't they? So why don't you tell the world about our grandfather whom we never met? Yes,
our grandfather. We never met either of our grandfathers, but one in particular, the Jensen side. He died during the great flu epidemic. In 1919, he'd been down to the docks. He was helping the soldiers come home, caught the flu there. He and Alice, his wife, had 5 children. Then the 6th came. Alice was in bed with the 6th child at home. And my father, then aged 10, can remember his father, our grandfather, wandering around the house with the flu and saying, "What's going to become of us? What's going to become of us?" And that, I think, that question has reverberated. What's going to become of us?
Yeah, because he was a middle-aged man, like many of that flu died. They were middle-aged people, weren't they?
Yeah, young middle-aged, 39. And
I don't know what you think middle-age is, mate, but 39 sounds about right to me.
There we go.
Or are you still middle-aged?
He was then taken off to hospital. I'm just bypassing this conversation, and he died in Balmain Hospital.
Yeah. And he was, but as I recall the story from Dad, he was a builder, carpenter, wasn't he?
Yeah, quite healthy, yes.
And so, and of course, in those days, the pension schemes weren't as well worked out or anything like that.
It was disastrous for the family, and they ended up in a remote country place. Dad used not to have shoes for his feet. He used to sleep on the veranda in the cold. It was extraordinarily difficult times. And of course, that generation, having passed through the Great War, then the Depression, or the flu, then the Depression, and then the Second World War, they were they knew a thing or two. That mob,
They had resilience that we don't necessarily have today.
No, it was a very, very different world and a wonderful generation. We were blessed by our parents. I have to say that by Mum and Dad. They were great people and a great blessing to us, I would say. Now,
well, they gave me a brother, you know.
Well, you're younger than me. Phil, you're going to be speaking about the virus and the epidemic at the Queen's birthday weekend. Just tell us a bit about that. And remember the question, what's going to become of us?
Yes, a good one. I might bring it in on that day. It's the Monday afternoon, the Queen's birthday holiday at 2 o'clock. We're going to live stream this time. We run it each year, but now it's live streaming this time.
Yeah.
Funny part, of course, is there are advantages. We've got people registered from all over the world, which we wouldn't have if we were running it in flesh. But you got to look at the world. See, I think this kind of pandemic puts a real question mark on the world's philosophy, on our Western society's culture.
Yep.
Death is something that materialistic, hedonistic humanism has very little answer for. In fact, it really poses the question, well, what was it all about? What's the point? What will become of us? And so our society's been built on our forefathers' generation, you're right, but in the last 70 years, it's been hedonism, been materialism, individualism. You've spoken about individualism. I remember in Synod a couple of times. There's a truth in individualism. We're all responsible.
Yeah.
But as a social system, it doesn't work. And
there's a sense in which it goes back to the New Testament. There is a sense in which it goes back, but the individualism of the New Testament is it doesn't sound crazy, but a communal individualism. It's individual, I take responsibility, but it's not individual in the sense that I am the Lord of the world. It's not.
No,
that.
or even the Lord of my world.
No.
Because, I mean, whatever else the governments have or haven't done, they've had to say we're all in this together. you know, suddenly we've discovered communalism.
Yeah.
And you realise that our economy, our wealth, your wealth, my wealth, the individual's wealth, only works because the economy is working as a whole.
Yeah.
And so it's put very big questions about the social philosophies we've operated on for the last couple of generations, I think.
Yeah.
And
who
so
we are as people, as human beings.
Yes, as human beings. Why do we value the old and the sick enough to lock down society?
Yeah.
Because it's the old and the sick who are dying, and yet the whole of society has to lock down. And you see, if you're a Darwinian naturalist, I'm not saying, you know, there's nothing to life other than just life, like Professor Dawkins. Well, eugenics really flows from it, doesn't it? I mean, these people are going to die anyway. What's the difference? They're just going to die earlier.
Yeah, historically, you're right. Absolutely. And interestingly, the move towards the demand for euthanasia tells us something. The whole Christian philosophy that undergirds our society of caring for the sick and having that commitment to the sick and to the elderly is put to doubt by euthanasia. I know it's always put as I must have the right to choose when I will die.
Yes.
But I've never really thought like that. And it is in a sense, a godless way to think, I believe.
Yeah.
So exposes us to the other thing, which is that it takes no notice of what we call the doctrine of original sin, because although a person dying may be thought to make their own choice, we're all actually relational people. And a great deal depends on the relationships we have as to what our choice is likely to be.
Yeah. There's that recent book that's come out, Dominion, written from a new non-Christian point of view, but a recognition that all the good parts of our philosophical society actually comes from the cross. And I read a really interesting testimony today from an academic here in Sydney, telling how going to a meeting with Peter Singer moved her out of atheism.
Yes.
Because she thought, no, actually humans and their death do matter. Yeah. And it took her a little while to move from atheism then through to agnosticism into Christianity. Yeah. But when you actually think through that kind of naturalism to its full extent, like Singer tries to do, it's inhuman.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Well, what's the difference in the death of a human being and the death of an elephant?
Yes. Yeah. Well, you've been thinking about death recently, haven't you, on the subject of heaven and its alternatives? So,
yes, 2 or 3 years ago, for some reason, I began to ask myself, well, what is heaven going to be like?
Could be to do with your age, do you think?
Could possibly be to do with my age, which is not that much more than yours, but nonetheless.
But is advanced.
This is true. But I just wondered, we talk about heaven, we talk about the afterlife and what's going to happen, but it's generally in very abstract terms. One of the differences that this virus reminds us of is that we live in a generation where, first of all, the whole idea of death is pushed aside. People are frightened to talk about it in a way that previous generations weren't. People have very little experience of death. We don't kill our own food, for example. We don't take care of the dying and bury them next door. The whole attitude of death has changed. And if you went back into previous generations of Christians, you would find they talked a lot about the process of death and what went beyond death. They talked a lot about this subject because it was something that was so prevalent. And particularly when something like plague came, death was on your door.
Well, it's on your door as you walk into church, if there's a cemetery around the church, isn't there? And I've got a funny feeling, isn't there a Wesleyan line about see how our people die well?
There is, I believe. And one of the things that our 19th century, 18th century ancestors were interested in was the stories of the deathbed. What happened? Now, this may seem bizarre to us, or worse than bizarre, but I think you'll find, and this is one of the things that the virus raises for us, that we are the ones who are strange, not them. As you're fully aware, Phil, we live in a world in which death is pornographic. You're not allowed to talk about death. You're not allowed to think about it because people don't know what to make of it.
Yes, but it's
not us. It's not us. It's not them. It's us.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this book that's come out recently, Dominion.
Yeah.
This is a book that takes us back to see that our world has actually come out of the cross.
Yeah.
Our culture has come out of the cross, rather than out of naturalism, and rather than out of being Greek or Roman with its hostility to humans. And I read this very interesting illustration, testimony today, of this girl who's moved from a view of, well, she heard Peter Singer. As an atheist, she heard Peter Singer.
Yeah.
And she realised that's not right, that atheism, it took her a while to move into Christianity from there. But you're right about it's being, we are the ones out of keeping. Ecclesiastes 7. Ecclesiastes 7 tells us that the heart of the fool is in the heart of the party, the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, because that's where wisdom is to be found. A party makes cackling noise like a fire and cackle, but it doesn't actually teach you anything.
No.
But death teaches you wisdom.
Yes.
And
what I did, just to interrupt you for a second, I can see you're on a bit of a roll there, but I'll tell you what I did. I thought to myself, well, what's heaven going to be like? I never really thought about it much. So what I did was I first of all looked at our biblical theology as how the Bible unfolds and what it talks about in terms of the future, like the kingdom, for example, the empire of David, and how that's put into the future in the New Testament. And then I looked at the metaphors for life after death, and particularly the heavenly life after death. I looked for things like home, for example, and it will be crowned and things like that. And of course, there is the bodily resurrection that I looked at. But then I tried to find glimpses. There's a few glimpses of heaven, so to speak, in some of the wording of the New Testament, like we are going to glory in one another, or we will wear an eternal weight of glory. What an extraordinary phrase. 2 Corinthians chapter 4. So I looked at all those things, and I sort of, the point that really, the subject of heaven is really a subset of the subject of Christology, our understanding of the Lord Jesus. If you understand who the Lord is, you will have some understanding of what heaven will be. That is how I could best summarize it, because he is the King of God's kingdom. He is the one who stands in our name, bearing our nature, stands in our name, who brings the kingdom together and passes the kingdom to the Father. He is the man from heaven whose body we will be like, because we are resurrected in his image and so forth. And so I think in the end, heaven, the best way I could think about it was to say that it's going to be glorious because it's going to be us like Jesus.
And the end of Philippians 3 gives you that, doesn't it? That we be transformed into his likeness. But the pictures that you get of Revelation all centre on the Lamb. Whatever other activities are going on, the Lamb is there in the middle, isn't he?
Correct. And that's what so we're going to be like him, glorious. We're going to be with him. What's happened? You're going to be with Jesus. Isn't that the best? I always think that's the best thing you can say. You're going to be with him.
And people are going to marvel in 2 Thessalonians 1, at the end of 2 Thessalonians, they're going to marvel because we are now like him.
Exactly, which is a bit of a change. But yes, so we are being changed even now in this life from one degree of good to another, but then we will be like him. And then the other thing that's really struck me, and you know, we have this vision of heaven that I think was medieval more than anything else, of it being just an incredible clouds,
guitar strumming,
guitars, yes, or harps. But it's going to be an immensely long choir practice. And it just doesn't seem all that attractive. But the truth of the matter is, when I looked at the metaphors and the glimpses, I saw purpose. I saw that we're not going to be just there. We're going to be there working for the Lord, who is the Lord of heaven and earth, and who is the Lord of the new heavens and the new earth that is going to emerge.
Well,
and so it'll be entirely, we're going to be like him. We're going to be with him. We're going to be in him. We're going to be working for him, is the best way I can put it. How about that? Not
in
bad.
him, in him, with him, for him. But the for him sounds a little workaholic. What about the images like Luke 16, where you know, the poor man's lying on Abraham's bosom? Which,
yes,
you know,
or the
a meal, a feast.
Yes, or when we say that the person who's died is at rest.
Yes.
Like the Sabbath rest of God. I think, remember when the Lord Jesus says about the Sabbath, that God is working on the Sabbath. And I think the work of which we speak here will be effortless work. It'll be entirely fulfilling. It'll be entirely relational.
Right.
It'll be community.
Yes, relational work here in a sinful world is never effortless, is it?
No. Aren't you glad we never worked together?
Absolutely, yes.
Can you imagine? Yes. Okay, sorry. We won't go there, folks.
No.
Cain and Abel.
Well, so though your mother wasn't a prophet, you're still telling us what's going to happen in the future.
Well, according to the Bible. And that's how I did it. I don't know. I think it'd be worth saying to the pastors who are listening and saying to all of them, this epidemic gives us an opportunity to go back to where Christians have been before. Read John Bunyan for a start, but go back to where Christians were before and ask ourselves, well, what is heaven going to be like?
Yes.
And
it's so commonly expressed in the negative, isn't it? That is, no more tears, no more pain, no more. That doesn't tell you what it's going to be like. It just tells you what it's not like. It's not like the bad parts of this world.
Yeah. But it's going to be magnificent. There's a great line in Bunyan where his Mr. Valiant for Truth goes over the river, and it says, and the trumpets sounded for him on the other side. Just welcome the greeting of the trumpets sounding for him on the other side. Yes, it's not a matter of meeting up with Peter and having to prove that you're worthy or something like that. Phil,
no, that would be awful.
What's happening about sharing the gospel? What does this, okay, this has raised the whole question for us of death. What's going to become of us? Said our grandfather. Well, is that question being raised?
Not in those terms, because we have alternative gods today, like the government, and they're going to look after us somehow. But yes, the big issues of life are. When we evangelize, we often talk of that road sign, which says, stop, you're going the wrong way, go back. I think the pandemic is saying, stop, you're going the wrong way. But where do you turn back? What are people turning back? I don't think they're turning back, but I think they're opening to talking. We can now share with them about all kinds of issues. And I've rung up different people, just neighbours, friends, etc. Anybody and everybody is now willing to talk about life seriously. I no longer have to talk about the football, which is pretty good because there is none to talk about, but it's not that kind of superficial conversation. You start saying, how are you getting on lockdown? And then they tell you about their family life. Then they tell you about what matters. And people have stopped. And, Socrates, the examined life has now come back into the Australian community which is profoundly well known for its unexamined life.
Yeah.
And so that gives you gospel opportunities like we haven't had in conversations for a long time. But of course, you have to speak to people. Evangelism never happens if you don't go and talk to them.
But what you just said was very helpful to me personally. You've rung them up. And it may well be that it's like radio. Radio is not television. It's more intimate in a way. And it may be that a phone call is a better way into the situation or the conversation than simply meeting up with someone. That's an interesting suggestion.
Yeah, I think it is. You see, I've rung some people, a couple of people I haven't spoken to for 10 years, 15 years. But I've rung them up. They've been overwhelmed by the sense of, oh, you care. You know, I mean, it's lovely to hear from you. And we've had really good conversations with people about things that matter in life, things that matter to them, things, well, you've got a lot more gospel opportunity if you're talking about things that matter than if you're discussing the trivialities. Yeah. But I've also found with strangers, I've noticed that as I walk around, try and get some exercise, people under 40 do not talk to me. Even if I step out of the way and stand in the gutter for them to walk past me, they don't say thank you. People over 40 will talk to me. And the older they are, the more they'll talk. And so a few times I've said to people, oh, it's a lovely day. And we've stood 5-10 feet away from each other. And one person said, I'm so glad you've talked to me. I'm living alone. And I haven't had anybody to talk to me for a week or two. You know, stranger evangelism that I normally wouldn't have. It's an opportunity.
Fascinating. Okay. Well, that's an incentive, I have to say. An incentive to me. So thank you for that. That's really great. I'm still waiting for my phone call from Philip, let me say. You say 10 years.
Yeah, hang around.
One last subject. Time's running out, but one last subject. Okay. To what extent is this an opportunity to rethink church?
Oh, absolutely. Sorry for jumping in, but yeah, if ever there was an opportunity, here is the moment. You always got to turn crises into opportunities. This is one of those, and it's a terrific opportunity. I've been really pleased and proud of my Christian brothers and sisters for the adaptability. You know, I've been to lots of church services in the last few weeks because they're all online. I can go to all kinds.
We go to 4 on a Sunday.
Yes, and they're all different, and people are using different platforms, different ways. It's been creativity and fantastic, but it's not church. You know, I mean, in a sense, it's virtual church. It doesn't quite work, but we're not sure we're going to be able to go back to it, to what it was. See, the reason people are so keen to get a vaccine is so that they can go back to the old normal. But there's no guarantee the vaccine's coming, or coming soon, or ever. We haven't got one for SARS. We haven't got one for AIDS. We're not sure we're going to get it. And the way the government is releasing our society, 10 people can meet together in church. Well, most churches have more than 10 people. And even when they expand it further, it's going to be spaced out from each other. So what do we do with our old pews? What do we do with the buildings? How do we actually meet together? Because we want to get back together as soon as we can, but that's going to take some time on the present program. I've been interested how the people who want to make money are very good at adapting to new ways of doing things. You know, you can buy milk at McDonald's. They're doing it for money. We've got a much more important thing to do. And so we need to work out how to deliver what we're trying to deliver in church in new and creative and better ways. Problem is, just pragmatism won't do it. If we're going to do it, we've got to go back to work out what church should be, what we really want church to be. We've got to go back and do what you've done about heaven, go back into the Bible and search through and think through what church really is, and not just assume the way we've been doing it in the past was actually optimal. It most likely wasn't, because we're creatures of habit, and after a while you just do what you do and the traditions set in. This is the opportunity to go back and rethink what church is about. I mean, you were telling me earlier about today about Claire Smith's book on church and teaching. It was about church as a teaching and learning
community. Yes,
community.
Her PhD was on this, a teaching and learning community, and she owed that to Professor Edwin Judge as well. But she explored it, and it's a very interesting, turned into a book. It's very interesting.
Well, if that's what it is, are the things we're doing on a Sunday morning or Sunday night the thing? In fact, why do we meet Sunday morning, Sunday night? And why do we have 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 7 o'clock? Why don't we have more church services? Smaller ones. If we've got to have smaller ones, we're not going to get back to use the big buildings that we've got. So we have to start thinking, how do I deliver this teaching, learning community, assuming that that's the right way to express it, in a way that is true and authentic and able. See, necessity is not the mother of invention. Necessity gives and forces the opportunity for those made in the image of God to invent. It's us to invent. The necessity might motivate us to, might force us to, but we're going to have to. And I just think this is a great opportunity. You can see the glass half full or half empty. I think this is half full.
Okay, I'll tell you what I would like. If I may interrupt you with a comment.
Go for it.
I'll tell you what I would like to see personally. I think we need to look again at in our circles. We need to look again at expository preaching and what we mean by expository preaching. That's become a bit of a shibboleth. What do we mean by it? And how is it best done? We've been working on that over the years, but I would like to see far more doctrine taught in the churches. I think we are failing because we're not teaching if you like, the outline of the faith into which the expository preaching comes. And there are other shibboleths, like, I seem to remember we were all being taught at one stage, one big point, etc. Well, if you teach one big point in each expository sermon, there'll be whole swathes of important biblical material. I think of the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, for example, which is never or so rarely the one big point that you could miss it altogether. Or when do we get together and talk about death and heaven? That's a good question to talk about, for example. So that's one thing. If we're going to be teaching, learning community, I'd like to say, let's look again at expository preaching, not abandon it, but ask, should we not teach doctrine? Philip, the ball is in your court.
I saw in the States, I saw a church where this man was all for expository preaching, and he used to give 5-10 minute sermons. And I thought, this is hopeless. How can he possibly teach the congregation this way? But when I actually visited them, they spent an hour to an hour and a half in all-age Sunday school. And the 10-15 minutes was just the exhortation for the week rather than the teaching. And in those Sunday school classes, yes, it was very doctrinal. It was big biblical. It was, you have notes, you sit there in lecture and seminar form. And so the congregation was very well taught without our kind of 30-minute expository preaching. It's what are we trying to achieve? Then we try and work out, well, what's a way of doing it in the context we find ourselves? I think what do we do with music?
Oh, please. Now, stop. Stop.
Yes. Even Cain and Abel might be divided if you mention
Well, I'm sure we agree, but the dangers of this subject, I think, are too great. I wrote a little article on music once, put it in Southern Cross, and I was told firmly by a friend, do not publish that article. And I was absolutely right. Absolutely right. But it is a question. What would you do with music in a teaching learning community? Does it matter? Is music essential to the gathering of Christians?
I'm sure we should be doing it, but it's going to be different if we can only gather in groups of 10.
It's in the Bible. Yeah,
I'm all for it. But if we're gathering in groups of 10, we're not going to have the same quality of electronic band that you're operating on when you can be in a gathering of 400.
Yeah. But it may give us something we don't have now.
Yes.
Hey,
Yeah.
back to congregational and to learning again to sing together and with each other. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Philip, this may be all madness that you and I are talking here, you realise. We're not trying to say, this is what you must do. We're just saying, why don't you think again about what we are doing and use this as an opportunity. You say it. I think you say it better.
I think we've got to stop saying, I want to go back to the old normal and look for how to get there. We've got to say, the new normal, whatever it's going to be, we don't know what it is, but let's be in charge of making what we want rather than being forced to do a compromise of what we used to have, which I think at the moment, most of our online services are like that. They're a kind of compromise, the best we can make of what we used to have, which we now do. We can do things differently.
I'll tell you what I've seen though. In our church, and I'm sure in many others, it could not work. The online stuff, we have a Zoom meeting in our church. It could not have worked without all the work that's gone in over the years, in expository preaching, in people knowing each other and loving. We have learned to love each other more in these times, more phone calls, more listening to each other. It has been wonderful, but it is based on what we did before.
That's right.
Just invent it. You couldn't just invent it. And I miss our church, and I am longing for the day when we can meet together again, if I don't go to heaven before then.
But I suspect you will never greet with them with a holy kiss.
Oh, please. No, yes, of course.
And I don't think a holy elbow bump is really the same thing.
But I think we have descended into nonsense, if I may say so.
That assumes that we were ever above it.
Do you want to say goodbye?
Goodbye to you. And goodbye to Arcos.
And goodbye to all who are still with us after this half hour. Bye.
Oh, well, thank you so much, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure having you both on and hearing you talk about COVID-19, life and faith during COVID-19. Peter, Philip, we appreciate your time and your conversation. And there's lots for the rest of us to think about. We've thought about heaven, we've thought about church, we've thought about life, the fact that other Christians have gone through something like this. And as Peter and Philip's grandfather sadly passed away during a previous pandemic, this is not a new situation for Christians. Well, anyway, this brings our everyday conversations to a close. Now, be sure to check out our website for more great content. Just Google the Gospel Coalition Australia. We'd love to see you there. And now, may God bless you and keep you, whichever part of the world you're in during this very unusual time of COVID-19. Till next time, goodbye.